and we're going to press this button, the y equals button. So it's up here in the top left-hand corner. Okay. When you go to y equals, you're going to get a list. It's going to look like this. Right? It's going to look like y1 equals, y2 equals, y3 equals, y4 equals, y5 equals, and so on and so forth. Those are all the different equations that you could tell your calculator you want to graph. We typically only do one or two at a time. But in reality, you could do a whole bunch of these at a time, and you could have all kinds of graphs on your calculator. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by trying to graph this equation. All right, so what we do is we put this part of it into our calculator under y1. So if you go to y1, you turn on, go to y equals, it should already be like in the y1 box, it should be blinking there. You're going to type negative 1.25, negative, not subtract, right? So negative is the button to set the decimal. Negative 1.25. X, your X button is beside alpha. Okay, so right next to alpha. And then plus 15. And what you've done is you've given your calculator an equation to work with. And it can do all kinds of things with that equation. It can graph it, it can tell you stuff about it, and so on and so forth. All right? Beautiful. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to graph it. Okay, so if you look in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a button that says graph. Click that button. When you graph, you should get this all of a sudden popping up on your screen. If you don't have that, let me know so I can quickly take a peek at it. Sometimes we just have to adjust things in the calculator. Yeah, usually that's fine. Usually a little bit different here. So it's the same. Everybody else? Now you got that, right? Perfect. Okay. This graph, the way we would look at it, you have x and y axes, okay? This is your y axis. This is your x axis. That line in the top right-hand corner, that's the graph. That's the equation you put into your calculator. So this thing is our actual graph. Right now, we would say that that's an insufficient graph. The reason it's an insufficient graph and not good enough is because it barely is filling our screen. It's just kind of up in the top right-hand corner. Typically, we want to be able to see our x-intercept, our y-intercept, and we don't want to waste too much room, like waste too much of the screen. I'll show you what I mean by that in a little bit. Looking at this, I can't see x or y-intercept. If I looked at that blue line, and I continued it, right? Because we know that line continues. It would go something like this. Correct? We can't see that, it's not on our screen, but we know that line's just going to keep going. So if we wanted to find our x-intercept, we would need our graph to show us further to the right. And if we wanted to see our y-intercept, we would need our graph to show us further up. You can do that with your calculator. Right? It's called setting the window. It's telling the calculator how far to each side you want to go. Right, up, left, down. We're going to do that right now together. So on your calculator, hit the window button. It's up here beside y equals. When you hit the window button, it's going to take you to a screen that looks like this. It's going to say a bunch of things. X min, X max, X scale, Y min, Y max, Y scale. Don't worry about the resolution. Everybody's on that screen? Fantastic. What this is telling you is if you had a Cartesian plane, your X minimum is how far to the left you want to be able to see. So for instance, right now your X minimum says -10. That's the standard X minimum. If if you wanted to see further left, you would make it -20 or something, so that it counts further out. If you wanted to see closer, you didn't want to go so far, you would maybe change it to -5, so that you're not so far out. Okay? X minimum is how far left you want to go. X maximum is how far right you want to go. If we remember our graph from before, we wanted to see further to the right. So our X maximum of 10 was too small. We need to make it bigger. So click down to X maximum and change it to 20. So your X maximum will now be 20. Awesome. Your next thing is called X scale. That's just what you're counting by. So you noticed on your graph there's probably little ticks, right? Right now it's a tick every 1. I almost always just leave it at 1 because it really doesn't make much of a difference to us. Your Y minimum. Your Y minimum is asking you how far down you want to see on your graph. Okay, so if I wanted to see really low, I would change it to something. I'm just going to leave it at -10 because I think that was low enough. It was a pretty good standard limit. Y maximum. Y maximum is how high up you want to go. We wanted to go higher, right? Our graph before, we couldn't see the y-intercept. We had to go higher up. So we need to change our y maximum from 10 to, let's say, 25. Your Y scale, again, that's how you're counting the ticks. I just always leave it at 1. I don't bother with it. Just so we follow along with the textbook, go back up to your X minimum and change it to -5. This guy right here, -5. And you have to use the negative button, not the subtraction button. So negatives beside the decimal. -5. Just so our picture looks the same as the textbook picture. Now that you have your window, it should look like this right here. Actually, what's in your calculator right now? -5, 20. The scale we left is 1. If they change to 5, that's fine, doesn't matter. Y min -10, Y max +10, 25. Those are the numbers I worry about. Hit graph. When you hit graph, you should now get a new image. It's the same equation, it's just looking at a different part of that same equation. All right, here's our Y and X axis right here. And this is our line. That's the same line we had before. You're just looking at a different part of it. You've shifted where you're looking in your window. Did everybody get that? Beautiful. That's not so bad, eh? There's other tricks that people might use, like Zoom features and stuff like that. I never use Zoom features and I've never found anyone who really needs them. But if you ever hear a teacher talking about Zoom features, just be like, oh, I don't know what that is. And maybe listen, maybe they'll teach something cool. But we don't stress too much about Zooming. A little note for you guys. So how you write your window settings, how you'll see it written in the textbook, is like this. I'm going to follow this format. So if I was like, what was the window setting for your question? You would say minimum was -5, maximum was 20, scale was, I usually put 1. If you put 5, that's fine. You won't get questions like that where I ask you that, but the textbook might reference things in that manner. Right? I think I've deleted anything out of all of our assignments and tests that involve that, because I don't think it's actually a standard practice. It's just what this book uses. And again, they can do the same thing. So if you want to know what your Y window was, they just go Y and then min, max, scale. Just so you have some way to like read it in the textbook if they write it out to you. Fantastic. We're going to skip the table of values. Actually, I'll show you where it is. We're never doing anything with it. So if you ever want to see the table of values, you should be able to go second and then graph. So if you click second, graph, it'll bring you to a table of values, like what we usually do by hand with inputs and outputs and stuff like that. If you can find a use for it, that's awesome. I'm never going to require you to use it. Right? It is beneficial to some people. Keep on going. Keep on going. Down to here, page 436. Okay, the reason we want to graph things on our calculator, one, it's way faster than graphing it by hand. More accurate, right? You don't need straight lines, so you know it's like perfectly on the line every time because it's a computer, right? It's going to do it right. And you can solve things really easily. Okay, you can find outputs if you know your input. You can find your input if you know your output. You can find your x-intercepts, your y-intercepts. You can find things really easy by just using your calculator instead of doing all those hand calculations that we normally do. Right? That's the benefit of getting good at the calculator. We're going to start off with finding a y-coordinate or an output. When you know an input. Okay, so if they give you an input. We're going to just scroll down a little bit. You should still have this picture up. We're going to scroll to here. What we're going to do is we are going to find y if x equals 4. And that's the question here. Find y given x equals 4. You know your input value. What's your output value? On a graph, what we would normally do is like look at it, trace it, right? If an equation, we would just put it in and then calculate it. On your calculator, when you're given an x value, you want to be looking at your graph. So hit graph, so you're back on this page right here. Awesome. Looking at your graph, hit the trace button. Okay, so trace is right beside graph, it's right here. When you hit trace, you're telling your calculator, I have an x value for you. All right, so you hit trace, then you hit 4. So you tell your calculator x equals 4, and then hit enter. And on the bottom of your screen, it'll now say this. And that is telling you when x equals 4, y equals 10. Input of 4, output of 10 for that equation. Really easy, right? Really quick. Really handy. So you could do another one, right? Try finding the y value when x equals 9. So if you want to find y when x equals 9, you would go trace, 9, enter. And on the bottom of your little screen, it now tells you that when x equals 9, y equals, some decimal, what is it? 2.75? 3.75. Right, so you could do that really quickly, which is kind of handy. That's the easiest one we do. All right, given an input, really easy to find an output. Trace, number, enter. Awesome. Finding the x coordinate. Finding the input when you have an output given to you. So now going the other way. All right, this question is going to be find x if y equals 8. So trying to find an input when you have an output isn't quite as easy. Right? Your calculator has no quick way to do it. It only knows how to take inputs, right, and then tell you the output. It doesn't know how to work in reverse. So what you do is you go to y equals. And you're back on your chart that looks like this. You have y1, y2, y3, y4, so on and so forth. You're going to draw a second line. The second line you're going to draw is at 8. So add that to y2. You're going to click down to y2, put 8, and then you should have this on your screen right now. What you're telling your calculator is to draw 2 lines. Draw the equation that I already had, and now draw a line at y equals 8. The reason that's going to be useful for us is then we're going to be able to look at our graph and see where y equals 8. So hit graph. When you hit graph, you should get this picture now. Just a little lower. This is my original equation, y1. This solid line is y equals 8. That's all the spots where y equals 8. You want to figure out where the blue line has y equals 8. So what you want to find is where these two things cross each other. Because that is where y equals 8. Your calculator can do that. All right, so it can figure out where two lines cross each other. The way we do it, we go second, trace. Second, trace. And it's going to bring you to a big list of things. Right? Oh, look at that. They even have the picture of the list of things you're looking at. Right here. This big list of things should be on your screen right now. I'll do a second trace. The fifth option is intersect. That's where do two lines cross each other? Where do they intersect? That's what we want to know, right? We want to know on our graph where do two lines cross each other. So pick the fifth option. When you hit the fifth option, it should bring you back to your graph all of a sudden. And you should, on the bottom of your graph, see this. First curve. All right, and you should have a cursor somewhere on this line. It might not be in the same spot, but you should have this little cursor somewhere. Yeah. Awesome. What you want to do, using your left and right arrows only, don't use your up and down arrows. Using your left and right arrows only, you're going to move that cursor so it's somewhere close to the intersection. If it's already right here, that's close enough. Okay, but you need to just be somewhere in this area using your left and right arrows. Once you're close enough, somewhere in that area, hit enter. Now it says second curve, and your cursor has moved to the other line. Right? It should be on here somewhere, and it should already be pretty close to the intersection point, right? That's your calculator kind of already figuring out where you're looking at. It's like, oh, okay, it's somewhere over here. It's kind of figuring it out. Hit enter one more time. On the bottom of your calculator, it now says guess. We'll never use the guess feature. Press enter one more time, and you'll be left with this on the bottom of your screen. And that tells you that if you want an output of 8, you need an input of 5.6. So x equals 5.6 to make an output of 8. I think that's the hardest one we do, in all honesty, is we get given an output and we need to remember to draw the second line and then find where they cross each other. I find that's the hardest one. Awesome. Let's try a question together. So, here's first example. Let's consider the equation y equals 2x minus 25. We're going to go to our y equals, and we're going to put this into y1. We're also going to delete out anything in y2. Right? We don't need any other lines. All we need is this in y1. So you should be putting 2x minus 25. You want to use the minus button, which is above the plus symbol. Don't use the negative one. Awesome. Before you graph, we like to set our window. Okay, so hit window. It brings you back to that list where it says x min, x max, x SCL, y min, y max, y SCL. You should be on that screen right now. We need to tell our calculator what we want for a window, how far up, down, left, right we want to work with this thing. All right. To do that, we typically start with our standard window. Our standard window is always negative 10, positive 10, negative 10, positive 10, and then we adjust from there. I don't know if you'll see anything if you do that right now. 10, 25. Oh no, you'll see a little bit. Yeah, let's try that so that you can see how to fix this. So in your Y min, Y max, like all that stuff, X minimum, go with negative 10. I didn't know. For your Y X max, I'll write it down here. Put positive 10. The scale, I just always leave at 1. For your Y min, put it at negative 10. For your Y max, put it at positive 10. I call that my standard window. That's how I start basically every question. Unless it's a word problem. When we get into word problems, we'll be able to set the windows more accurately. For non-word problems at this point, with our knowledge of lines and stuff like that, we basically just start in the standard window. When you do that, you don't get a very good graph, right? You should get a perfect square, right? It should be like an X or a T in your screen. And then you should get just like a little sliver in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm just going to copy somebody's. Yeah. I was like, it's going to be really little. It's going to be like this. That's all you got, like a little sliver in the bottom right-hand corner, correct? Awesome. If you look at that graph, it's insufficient. The reason it's insufficient is you can't see your x-axis, or your x-intercept, and you can't see your y-intercept. Looking at your little sliver of a graph, you can figure out where your x-intercept and your y-intercepts will be. If you keep going with this line, eventually somewhere out there, you're going to have an x-intercept. And if you go the other way, eventually somewhere down here, you're going to have your x-intercept. So what you need to do is see further right and further down. That means you need to have a bigger x maximum and a smaller y minimum to go lower. That's how I would see further right and further down. I'd go wider and lower. Thick window. We're going to go fix it. X maximum. I think we had to go quite a ways out there, to be honest. So I'm going to say for X maximum, let's put 15. So change this to be 15. I've now stretched my graph further right. My Y minimum. Again, I think I'm going to have to go way down, right? Because I was looking at that sliver, and it was really like vertical when I saw your calculator. So I'm going to say Y minimum of like negative 30. I'm going to go way down there. And then I'm going to hit graph. And now that I've stretched my window out, I should be able to actually see my graph. Here's hoping. Yeah, that's not bad, eh? So it looks like this. Someone like that? That's a sufficient graph because I can see my x-intercept and my y-intercept. And those are things I just always want to be able to see. In the future, we use them a lot. That's why you want to be able to see them. Fantastic. Now that we have a graph, I want you to try to answer the questions, starting with question B. Ignore C, find question D. Okay, so try to answer B and D on your own. If you get stuck, ask a friend if you want.